start. My name is Andres. This is the Baking Steel Test Kitchen. Got Chef Craig over here. I'm not able to move my computer. Say hi, Craig.
Hi.
Shout out to Monogram for these gorgeous ovens. And we're going to get into it. We're going to make, we got a really fun class today. We have a lot of newbies, so we thought that we would kind of take you through Pizza 101 and what we do here to make our dough and to make pizza. We're going to kind of break this up into two segments. So one will be dough making, and the second will be pizza making. So it'll be kind of like two classes in one. And it's going to be loaded with a lot of great stuff. And if you've been here before, it's a lot of repetition, which is always a good guide to get better at making pizza at home. Before we get into the oven, we're going to get right into making pizza dough. All right, so our dough, we've got a couple different versions. We call it a 72-hour pizza dough, and the reason for that is because it's fermented for 2 or 3 days. A minimum of 1 day, which we think is good, but it just keeps getting better with age. So we think by day 3 is like the ultimate strike zone. And you're gonna absolutely love it. If you haven't made this before, it's gonna get even better. You'll be making this weekly, in fact. That's how great it is. So let's get right into it. 4 ingredients in pizza dough. There's flour, salt, water, and yeast. Some people will add sugar, other people will add oil. For this one, we're using the 4 basic ingredients. And so I've got my mise en place ready here. I've got flour, salt, water, yeast. One thing we gotta remember when we're baking dough making dough is a science. We need to really dial it down. And so we use a digital scale to measure all of our ingredients, because really important to get that flour to water hydration on the button. It makes a big difference. And this dough is a relatively sticky dough. It's more difficult to work with, but that's what makes it great. So in any case, let's get right into it. The flour, this is a bread flour. We use organic. We highly recommend using organic because it has no chemicals in it, or fewer chemicals than, say, a non-organic version would be. And this is a bread flour, and there's a bunch of different flours. There's all-purpose flour, so think all-purpose, I think of pies and cookies. And for bread flour, it's got more of a protein, and there's also like a 00 flour. There's different variations of it. We find for a baking steel pizza baked at 500 degrees, bread flour is just a really nice ingredient to have in your pizza dough. It's got just enough stretch in it, and it's awesome. It also can withstand a 2 or 3 day ferment. Sometimes someone might have used an all-purpose flour, and you might find that it rips after maybe 2 days. So that's because the gluten structure isn't as strong as it would be in a bread flour. Okay, so everything's been pre-measured. This recipe is out there. We'll link to these. It's 500 grams of bread flour, 16 grams of sea salt, 1 gram of yeast, and it's active dry yeast. And this is filtered water. In the town I live in, we filter the water. I don't love the taste of it out of the tap, so it's filtered. Tastes great. I cook with it that way. This is room temperature. Ideal again, because you'll see as we get to that next stage, we don't need cold or hot water. Okay. In fact, what I'm going to do first is take my salt and dissolve it in my water, and I kind of whisk it together here. I shouldn't have used a whisk, it's not to get wet. I'll let this dissolve, and that takes a couple of minutes. And then my yeast, which is active dry yeast, this is literally 1 gram of yeast we add. Those yeast packages that those foil packages from, who's one of the yeast makers? Fleshman's Active Dry Yeast. They have like those foil packages. I think Red Star is another one. Those are 9 grams. We're using 1/9 of that, so micro amounts. I kind of whisk that together right into my flour. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is take my salt mixer and give it one last kind of swirl. Make sure it's dissolved or close to being dissolved. We're under a little bit of a time gun here, so I'm not completely dissolving it, but it's close enough. And I just pour that into my flour, take my spoon, Before I dump this onto the counter, I'm just going to literally kind of get the water and flour started. And now I'll remove it out of my bowl, clean out my bowl, and I'm going to whisk this. So on a skill level of 1 to 10, this is about a 3, maybe a 2. Not a very high skill level. It's not difficult making pizza dough. The important things are having the right ingredients and then the right amount of ingredients. This is called a bench scraper or a dough scraper. It's awesome for kind of getting underneath this pile of dough. And I'm just going to lightly press it with my hands. And I scrape underneath it and I press again. And the first few times I'm going to do this, I'm going to put a timer on myself for about 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. And I'm just trying to press the flour and the water together so I don't have any dry clumps. And I have found that 2 minutes of vigorous kneading kind of eliminates any dry clumps. And if I'm going to do a bigger batch of dough, I might want to do it for 3 or 4 minutes, right? Kind of make up. And you can see, like, I don't know, can you see that? It's getting sticky. Like the water kind of absorbed into the flour more, so it's coming out and it's sticking to my hands a little bit more. That's kind of a tell that I know that I'm done. And what I'm going to do is take this, right, and remove it and put it right back into the bowl. I'm going to cover this up. I have a lid. Cover this up, okay? And now, here's where things have changed a little bit since we started this back, I want to say, a couple of years ago. This is a dough, it's been mixed, it's ready to rock and roll. What I'm going to take this and leave it at room temperature for the next 12 to 24 hours, depending on the time of year. I find in the summer, I'll maybe shorten that time to 12 hours, but in the winter when it's cooler, I don't keep it very warm in here. It's like 68. I might leave this out for 24 hours, and then I'm going to take this container and put it into the refrigerator overnight for 2 or 3 days, depending when I want to make pizza. So if I'm making pizza on Friday night, this dough is made on Tuesday, and it's ideal because we find days 2, 3, 4, 5 are really the sweet spot for this dough. Day 3, ideal, is epic. The reason we put it cold is because it's going to slow the fermentation process down. So by 10 o'clock tonight, this will, have risen, maybe not double yet. I'll place it into the fridge and I'll forget about it for 2 or 3 days. And then what's happening is the fermentation process is still taking place. Flavor is being developed. Glutens are being broken down. But by Friday, that dough is awesome. I've already done this. Obviously, we're not going to wait around for 2 or 3 days. Made dough this weekend. I've got a bigger container here. And actually, you can see I've been removing this as we go here because what we've found is this dough's been cold fermenting. It's got a ton of flavor. I'm just going to remove what I need for that day or next day or two. I'm going to remove it, make my dough balls, and let those sit at room temperature for 3 or 4 hours. And there's our pizza day, right? So on Friday, if I'm going to make all of them, I'll make a bunch of dough balls. If I'm only making 2, I'll just remove 2 out and leave the rest in the container, or if I'm making bread or whatever it might be. Does that make sense to you guys? What I'm going to do next is make a dough ball, then we'll get to some questions and answers before we get into making pizzas. But just so you know, I got up early this morning and balled up some dough about 6:30 or 7 this morning, because that dough needs to rest before we stretch it out. And it's been resting, I'll show you here, for like maybe 3 or 4 hours in this dough container. So the glutens are nice and relaxed, so we'll stretch. This dough is cold. We talked before how the dough is very wet. Well, cold dough is a lot easier to use and make dough balls with than room temperature dough. Right? It's funny how that just the coldness takes away some of that moisture because it's colder. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one dough ball. I'll show you how I do it. I'm making about 250 grams. So I just basically, and I measure my dough balls, by the way. Everything's on a scale. It's not very close. It's still not very close. All right, close enough here. So I take my dough, after I literally cut it off, I take some flour, I flour my hands, okay? Flour this piece of dough up. Can you see okay there? And now I'm just gonna pick it up, and I'm gonna fold it in half, just like this, and then turn my hands 1/4. I'm gonna lightly press my fingers in and close it again. I'm gonna follow that same sequence about 15 or 20 times. If my hands get sticky at all, just put some more flour on them. And this is the same flour that's in the recipe. Press in, light, and then close and turn. Grab each side and just follow that same sequence. And what I'm doing is I'm knocking some of the air out, right, and making a ball. I'm keeping the gluten strands. It's not a stress ball because someone inevitably is going to take this and think it's a stress ball and squeeze it really tight. My hands are being very gentle, and I'm just pressing in and turning. And you can see here, it's smooth like a baby's butt on one end, and then I've got the seam on the other. And I keep that same sequence, turn and press. When it's formed a tighter ball, I just press that smooth side into my palm, and now I'm going to pinch that seam closed, and you can see I've got this beautiful dough ball that I will put back into a deli, which will be, actually, if I'm making pizza the same day, I can put them on a sheet tray, just lightly cover it with saran wrap. Or if I'm gonna, these delis come in really handy. Post in here, a little bit of olive oil. I have olive oil somewhere. A little bit of olive oil, seam side down. I'll let this rest for 3 or 4 hours, maybe even 4 or 5, depending on the temperature. And boom, we're gonna have our pizza later on tonight. That dough takes time, because I just massage all those glutens. It's gotta chill out, okay, and relax, like we did this morning. That is the dough. So that is my steps to making the 72-hour dough, 2, 3, or 4. Let's get to some questions. I hope that was helpful.
Difference between all-purpose and bread flour.
Great question. So the difference between all-purpose and bread flour. I mentioned this earlier, bread flour, and if I think of all-purpose flour, I'm thinking of cookies and pies, softer, right? Pancakes. When I get into bread flour, it's got a higher protein content. It's got more gluten, more strength, which is why we're able to shape it into different shapes and forms. And that's one of the major differences there.
Preferred temperature for fermentation at room and cold?
That's a great question. And the bread bakers out here really dial this in. Like, they really want to get their dough at a specific temperature, etc. Pizza makers, I'm sure there's some that more dialed in than I would be, but what I have found, I keep this around 66, 67 at night when no one's in here, and that's gonna be a slower fermentation than it would be if it was like 75, like in the summer, like 77. It'll speed up the process. So ideally around 70 degrees. I don't know what your temperature is in your home, but that seems to be a pretty good number for fermentation.
Do you leave the ball uncovered on the counter or covered?
Good question. Do I leave the dough balls covered or uncovered? I will always cover my dough balls. In fact, if you see, this is called a dough tray. This is an airtight lid, believe it or not. No air getting in. I don't want any air. It makes a crust on that dough, and it makes it kind of crispy. That has happened to you, not a problem. Just sprinkle a little bit of water on it afterwards, it'll be fine. But to answer your question, always cover your dough.
What's your specific flour you use?
Ooh, great question. What is this specific flour I use today, which was a product from Central Milling? It is called their high gluten, high mountain organic flour. And we will link to it if you'd like. It's a great flour. We buy it in 50-pound bags and have it shipped, but you're able to buy it online too. And there's other brands, by the way. King Arthur Flour is great. Janie's Mill, which is another great company that we learned about over the last few months. Make great flours.
What surface are you using?
This is a white oak countertop. It's wood, obviously, and I really like wood because it doesn't, change temperature as drastically as like back here. I've got soapstone. Gets a little cold, which is fine, by the way. I just know when I'm kneading a lot of dough, it's a little bit more forgiving than a really hard rock on top. So it's a little bit easier to work.
Sourdough.
Sourdough we'll get into with another class, but that obviously is a different process where you take flour and water over several and make a sourdough starter, and then you input that into your kind of recipe, if you will. We've done this before, but it's a little bit more involved than a yeasted dough. But great question.
Your recommendation for gluten-free flour?
Ooh, that's a great question. Gluten-free. In fact, haven't even tried this yet, but I've seen it online. Caputo. Shout out to those guys. This is a gluten-free flour, pizza flour. And what they've done is they've basically taken all the ingredients you need to make a gluten-free pizza and combined it into one bag, which is actually a brilliant idea because a lot of times to make a gluten-free recipe, you need to have a lot of different ingredients. They've made it all into one, which is brilliant. Can't wait to try it. Stay tuned. If we like it, we'll be talking about it again for sure.
Opinion of vital wheat gluten to bring up all-purpose protein content.
Ooh, this is a great question. Can you use, there's a product called Vital Wheat Gluten, which is a gluten product that you buy, like Bob Red Mill has one. And what we do is we just add it into a batch of flour. And I've used it in someone asked, in like an all-purpose flour to give it more strength. Sure, it's a good idea, why not? Give it a whirl. But for those of you guys, I don't recommend that. It's like a patch, I guess. But I don't really have an answer for that. It's cool, I guess, but not necessary. Just buy the bread flour to start. What else we got?
Do you keep the dough covered all the time, warm, cold? I saw you use a dish towel once.
Oh, yes. Do I always keep the dough covered? These Cambros, these like dough, have a sealable lid. You can hear it like kind of snap into place. If I didn't have a lid and I just had a bowl, saran wrap is fine. When I made a lot of dough in my house, this is like the test kitchen here, I would use a cloth, like a cotton cloth. Just be careful if you're using a wet cloth because those strands of cotton can get stuck in the dough, which I've done that a few times too. And you gotta kind of spend your time picking those out. Not that fun. Not that tasty either.
Can you explain why such little yeast?
Can we explain why we use such a small amount of yeast? That's a great question. Our recipe is based off of Jim Leahy, No Knead Dough, and he came out and said if we're proofing our dough overnight, we don't really need a lot of yeast because, and wouldn't you know it, by the way, there's a lot of recipes call us use that foil package of dough and yeast, and it works faster, and it makes dough faster. I could make pizza in like 2 hours if I used a lot of yeast. It would look pretty, but it would have no taste. So we found by using micro amounts, you're getting the same effect, whereas you're still getting a fermentation process over time, but you don't need a lot of yeast. We've actually experimented using less yeast, less than 1 gram in a 500 gram batch of dough, and guess what? It works. But we kind of stuck with 1 gram for whatever reason, but you don't need a lot. A lot of recipes will say, in fact, I saw one the other day, in fact, on the bottom of this Caputo package, this right here, I read the recipe. What was, I can't even see, what was it, 15 grams, chef?
15 grams of yeast, yep.
How much flour do they say?
1,000.
1,000 grams is part of the whole package. Yeah. 15 grams, so that's 2 of those packages in that batch. That is, I can't imagine that's just a lot of yeast, guys. You don't need that much. So our experiment would be dial it down. And Jim Leahy talked about it first, or not first maybe, but talked about it. We've kind of implemented that into our system here, and it works for everything. From English muffins to bagels to pizza dough to bread. You don't need a lot of yeast. And that's it. All right. Awesome. All right. So let's get into pizza making now. It's like phase 2. Let's pretend for a second that we just ball up that dough and 4 hours have passed and now our dough is relaxed. I'm going to show you guys this again. This is about the same size dough ball I made, but it's airtight so it's soft, and you can see it's room temperature now, but it's kind of supple and soft. We're going to make a pizza with that. So I'm going to walk you through the steps I use to make pizza, all right? And the first thing I do, and I did this at like 9 o'clock, I turn my oven on. Here, you can see, I preheat. I got 2 steels, by the way, 2 baking steels, because we're steel happy. I preheat this oven at 450 degrees for about an hour of time. Maybe more if I have it, that's fine. It's actually like a heater this morning in here, a little cooler. Anyway, those have been going since 9 o'clock. Steels are ripping hot. At 450 versus 500, and I'll tell you the reason why, is because I like to use the broiler. So I have found in my home oven, if I preheat at 450, then when I turn the broiler on, it kind of comes on within a minute or 2. If the oven's too hot in this oven, this margarine gets too hot and I put the broiler on, it takes like 10 minutes. So we've kind of tricked it. We said, hey, we don't need that much heat right now. We blast the broiler on, it somehow comes on mysteriously really fast. So experiment again. And this is electric versus here we got a gas oven. The gas will turn on almost instantaneously. So just be mindful when you're making your pizza at home, preheat it, either 500 or 450. If you have convection, definitely use your convection. That's just a fan that blows around heat. If I'm making pizza, this dough has been resting at room temperature for several hours because we want it to be ideal. And anyway, that's my dough. My ovens are hot. My dough is ready. We're gonna make a basic cheese pizza, and I've got my cheese ready here, 3 cheeses. This is gonna be a low moisture mozzarella. This is a Parm Reggiano, so it's a hard aged nice cheese, and I've got some fresh mozzarella here. So 3 different cheeses on a cheese pizza. The tomatoes, my tomato sauce, this is not my grandmother's recipe. This is our crushed tomatoes. These happen to be organic Bianco de Napoli tomatoes, crushed already. All I'm gonna do is add some salt to these. In fact, I'm gonna do that right now. This is the secret sauce, guys. This is it. And if you've been following us for a while, we do not, again, use our grandmother's recipe. We just take a little bit of sea salt, okay? We got me a spatula stuff, like the GI small one. I'm gonna take a little bit of sea salt, about 10 grams. I'm guessing, I shouldn't do, but I've done that enough times. Good catch. And I'm just gonna kind of mix my sauce in there, my salt in there. That's the secret sauce. That's all I do for my pizza sauce. And if I bought whole plum tomatoes, I can grind those or crush them myself, or you can just buy them already crushed. They're awesome. Highly recommend these babies. Available now at most Whole Foods, by the way. That's my commercial break. All right, let's get into the pizza dough. So if I'm gonna, I flour my work surface. Can you guys see that okay? Yeah, good. I'm gonna take my dough off. Let's get a little flour on this. And I'm gonna put my dough right into this flour pile, okay? And what I'm gonna do next is kind of pick it up and make sure nothing's getting stuck, okay? And is that iPhone picking that up too? Awesome. What I'm gonna do now is just kind of lightly press this dough out. And again, this dough's been relaxing for like 4 hours, so like it's been in a yoga class. It's super chill. And I lightly press it out. When it gets to be about a disc, I'm gonna put that aside for a second and grab my pizza peel. This is a wooden peel. I like wood over metal because it whisks away some of the moisture. I'm gonna lube this up. And before I get any wise guys there, I always say, excuse me, I always say lightly dust it, and someone always comments, I pile the flour on. Well, I'm trying to just show you guys that you need to lube it, okay? And less is more, but you need to get this into the hot oven. So anyway, those are my ball bearings. Keep that aside for a second as I get back to my dough. And I lightly press this out. When it gets to be about 6 or 7 inches, I'm going to pick this up and let gravity now do its thing. And I just kind of lightly turn. I work around the perimeter, and I give it a little shake, and you can see how it's stretching itself. I'm not doing anything. I'm not mega talented, not David Blaine, just kind of stretching itself. And then I'm going to do is just put this right on top of my peel. You can see that, right? And before I do sauce or before I do cheese, I can stretch this a little bit bigger if I want. I'd like to kind of pinch my edges a little bit. I talked about this a few times. What it does is it kind of creates some contours and different variations on the crust, which I kind of like. You don't have to. You can see those air bubbles. Aren't they beautiful? Right? And before I do anything else, sauce or cheese, I'm going to give it a little shake. And this dough needs to slide like a hockey puck, back and forth. If it doesn't, I need to pick up that troubled area, put some more semolina under there, and make sure it slides. And now I'm confident I can get into the oven. So I do this sliding, the hockey puck thing, throughout the pizza making process. All right? This is going to be a small one. I like it. All right, so now for my sauce, so I grab a spoon. I'm going to take the sauce and just put it right on top of my pizza. You see good there? Yeah. And our mantra is less is more. So I put my sauce on, maybe a little bit more. Careful not to spill the sauce on the peel. That makes it get stuck. A lot of moisture in the sauce, so less is more is a really good mantra. And before I do cheese, I'm going to give it a little shake again. It's still sliding like the puck, which is amazing. And now that my pizza's almost done, I'm going to go over to my oven and just switch it over to broil. I think it's got about 2 minutes left, and that thing's going to switch to broil. I like to layer in some oregano on top a little bit, right? Some Parmigiano underneath, because what this does kind of gives you a little bit of saltiness when you bite it into your pizza. It's like a secret ingredient underneath. All right, okay, and now I'm going to pull out the Wonder Shredder. Maybe I'll comment about this later. 1912, I think this thing is. Low moisture mozzarella. I shred it right on the pizza. We talked about this. Write this one down. Always shred your own cheese. All right. The Wonder Shredder there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some fresh mozzarella. I'm going to break this by hand. That's how we roll. Boom. That's our cheese. And before I do anything else, before I go back to that oven, I'm going to give it a little shake again. It's still sliding like a hockey puck. I don't have a ton of toppings on there, right? Not a lot of weight. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out my oven. My broiler is on, which is amazing. And I'm just going to put the front of the peel to the back of the steel and launch this thing. Boom. Right? And now I'll take my timer, just right here. And I always time myself, especially with that broiler on. I'm trying to make a pizza in 4 minutes on my baking steel. And what I do is I put this on for 2 minutes first. After 2 minutes, I'm going to peek inside and maybe rotate that pizza a little bit, turn the broiler off, and bake it for maybe 2 more minutes, and we should be done. Have a pizza in 4 minutes. It'll be epic. All right? Let's get to some questions. We have about a minute and a half before we do.
Fresh mozzarella should be dry.
Yes, great question. Should my fresh mozzarella be dry? It is. We buy this in a plastic wrap, like it's really tightly covered. They have mozzarella in a brine. I don't recommend buying that style. If you do, just be sure to wring it out first, almost like take a rag or some cheesecloth and squeeze that moisture out of it first. It makes a big difference because you don't want to add a lot of moisture to pizza.
3 types of cheese.
The 3 types of cheese. This happens to be whole milk, low moisture mozzarella. Go to the deli, the kind where you get your slices of cheese. I do this at Whole Foods sometimes, where they slice the cheese for you. Just tell them you don't want a slice, you want a block. And then you take that block home and you shred it yourself. Always shred your own cheese. And I've said this a million times, but those pre-shredded cheeses have a coating of starch on them, which makes them not stick together, which tend to brown too fast in the oven. So we kind of found a shortcut. Hey, don't just shred it yourself. Eliminates that premature browning, and you've got awesome cheese in your pizza. And then mozzarella. This is a Parmigiano. Super expensive, but this will last me months. And I just grate a little bit on each pizza I make underneath, whether I'm using sauce or not, just to see what that extra flavor. Oh, check that out. All right, so 2 minutes have gone by. Broiler's on. Oh yeah, it looks amazing. I'm gonna turn the broiler off right away. It's getting too dark. I'll put my oven back on 500. Can you see that okay? You guys can't see it. I'm just gonna rotate it. It's not quite done underneath it. Close my oven up. Maybe 2 more minutes, maybe 90 seconds. We'll be done. Let's just do that.
Good, 90 seconds. 3-part broiler question.
Let's make sure my time was going. No, I don't want to forget.
3-part broiler question.
3-part, okay.
When you shut the broiler off, do you go back to bake? Do you leave the broiler on the whole time? And then my broiler has high, medium, and low. What should I use it on?
Great question. All right, so 3-part broiler question. 1, do we switch the broiler back and forth? As you can see, I just did. I went from broiler to back to convection bake because I did not want the broiler to keep beaming down. In fact, I was getting almost too much color on top already. So hopefully that'll stop. So that's one trick. And then if I have 3 different settings, low, medium, high, just go to the high setting. I don't mess with the low or medium. I don't even have a medium, I don't think. I just go broiler high or no broiler at all. And then the third question was that 3?
High, medium, or low.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah.
What was the second question? I think I answered
Turn it off back and forth. Do you cook it the whole time? No,
Oh yeah, no, I do not cook it the whole time. However, the only time I would keep my broiler on if I'm making multiple pizzas. If I was making multiple, I would have taken that pizza and moved it to the bottom steel and launched a new one on top. In that case, I'm leaving the broiler on. But I've got 2 steels in there, and that's the only reason. All right, anybody else?
I have a great question for when you take it out.
All right, good. We've got about 10 seconds left, and that'll be about a 3.5-minute pizza. Pretty fast in a home environment, obviously, and it's going to be really crispy. Let's see what it looks like. Awesome. So that's 3.5 poured out. Be careful using your fingers like I do. That's our pizza, and you can see underneath it's perfectly cooked. It's hot, obviously, so I want to be careful, but if I wanted to crisp it up even more, I could leave it in there for another minute, but for the sake of class, you can see we've got this beautiful pizza. It's got some char on top if you like. Again, if you don't like char, don't use the broiler. Bake it longer for like 5 or 6 minutes. This looks amazing. And if you have basil, now's the time to nail it on top, or add some Parmesan on top, right? There you go. Boom. Here's your cheese pizza, basil flavor. It's crispy, you can see. Look at that. It's cooked nicely. Underneath, you see underneath there? Boom. That's our pizza. Anybody hungry? Anybody hungry?
Last question.
Last question. Here we go.
Best question.
Last and the best, apparently.
Steel versus stone.
Ooh, great question. Baking steel versus stone. So I've used pizza stones throughout my entire life, and my pizzas were medium, and I would not be holding a Zoom class telling you guys how to make pizza if I was using stone. It just was not exciting. We just made this pizza in 3.5 minutes, which is one of the great benefits of the steel. When the steel gets to 500 degrees and the stone gets to 500 degrees, the steel is going to stay there. It's going to remain hot at 500, which allows this crust to kind of sear on the outside, right? And remain airy and light on the inside. And so it's like a seared crust with a lot of moisture. Pizza stones take forever to cook, 10 or 12 minutes. All the moisture evaporates out of the dough into the air, the atmosphere, and it dries out the crust. So the baking steel, really the easiest way to explain it is it's ultra conductive. And once it gets hot, it stays hot. It allows us to make pizza after pizza after pizza, legendary. That with the great dough, this is like incredible, like an incredible pizza. I wish you guys were here to join us. All right, was that a good last question? I think that was great. You guys rock. Thank you for being here for this Zoom, and we'll be back next week doing another one. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we hope you loved it. Thanks, guys. Good. That's a wrap. Oh, try to close that.